Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing well this evening or daytime, depending on where you're listening from. If you can give me a shout real quick in the chat if you're in there and let me know how everything's sounding. And while we wait for that, I think I'm just going to start rolling here. Hopefully, everybody's having a good September. I'm still getting used to the fact that it is 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the greater Cincinnati area here in Southern Ohio. The only thing that makes it feel like Christmas time is the fact that I have a tree up in the other room. And more and more people are coming home. I've got everybody at home now. But yeah, it's good to see everybody. Jay, good to see you in the chat. Hey, Adam and Hendo. Sounds like you can hear us, brother. We're gonna get rolling here. Welcome, everybody, to the December 2023 Industry Pro interview. Today, I'm going to be talking to Hendo Henderson of Rockstar Brewer Academy. Adam Makes Beer is now a podcast. Check out Spotify, Apple Podcast, and see all the long-form brewer interviews we have done. After you subscribe, please leave a review and comment as well, because it really helps support the work I'm doing. Also, if you're new to the channel or podcast, go to Adam Makes Beer on YouTube, click the playlist tab, and see tons of info, full brew days, technique videos, tutorial videos, now over 530 videos on YouTube. As always, if you're getting value out of this content, please follow, rate, like, comment, and share. All those things you're supposed to do with the stuff we're putting online, if it works for you. Please feel free to check out a channel membership for $2.99 a month right now. You do receive the benefit of getting a priority for our monthly Q&A live streams when you have questions. I am going to have another tier coming up in 2024. I'll be digging into that a little bit more in the January live stream podcast, which is still TBD as of right now. But there are going to be some cool benefits coming up. And some special subscriber content. So that's what I'm going to be working on after Christmas and into January. But also, just the update, just yesterday, we hit 5,000 subs over on YouTube. Pretty exciting. We've been doing this for 19 months. Just a quick little breakdown. In that 19 months, we've had 365,000 views of the stuff we've been putting up, over 25,000 watch hours, the 5,000 subs I just mentioned. We started doing podcasts. We got our first sponsor with Blickman Engineering. They've been wonderful to work with. And I'm just so filled with gratitude for all the support you've showed us over the last 19 months. It's just such a special thing to me. I started doing this channel, seeing maybe some space to put some pro side brewing content on YouTube, and it's just been you've all been so supportive, and I just really appreciate it. It ends up today that I'm going to be talking to somebody that ended up giving me the nudge. I checked out some of his content on YouTube, and that was kind of a jumping off point for me. Speaking of the Industry Pro interview podcast that we do, 2024 is shaping up to be pretty sweet. As of right now, I have Julian Trago from Beechwood Barbecue lined up. John Palmer, I don't even have to say from where, from the Water Book, from How to Brew. Probably one of the nicest guys on planet Earth. I'm going to have John Haggerty of Warped Wing. I'm going to have Mitch Steele of New Realm as well. So that's going to kind of fill out the first 4 months. So we have some really cool stuff coming up, and I hope you stick around for it. But as I mentioned, let's have a word about our wonderful sponsor, Blickman Engineering. Blickman Engineering has been the pioneer of nano brewing, and they have helped hundreds of successful breweries achieve their dreams since they started with 1-barrel systems in 2006. Now offering a full suite of brew houses up to 15-barrel skidded and insulated, matching cellaring equipment, keg washers, grain mills, and more, sized specifically for the nano brewer. Blickman Pro Brewing systems are competitively priced without sacrificing quality. And the simple design and factory direct support from our brewing experts gets you up and running faster than anything else on the market. When you're ready to go pro or just kicking the tires, be sure to reach out to them for expert advice and a partner to help you through it all. Turn your dreams into a reality by reaching out to Phil, Tom, or Josh at proseries@blickmanengineering.com. Again, that's proseries@blickmanengineering.com. Blickman Engineering Pro Brewing is proud to be the equipment sponsor for this channel and is committed to helping every brewer, no matter where they are in their journey. And as I mentioned before, we are joined today by Steve Hendo Henderson. Everybody just calls him Hendo, though. He is the founder of Rockstar Brewer Academy, a coaching group for professional brewers to get access to actionable brewing technical knowledge so they can brew world-class, award-winning beer. Please make sure, we'll mention at the end of the show as well, but check him out on Instagram and X at Rockstar Brewer. And check out all of his good stuff there. He's on Facebook as well, Rockstar Brewer. Hendo, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing really, really well. It's great to see you, Adam. It's good to be here.
Definitely, man. We connected.
About winter though, it's like you talk about, what is it, 50 degrees? It's summer here. Christmas is in summer for an Australian. So.
Exactly. Well, for me, so I lived 6 hours north of here, and I was in Michigan, surrounded by the Great Lakes, and so it was colder up there, and we got a heck of a lot more snow than we do down here. It's a whole different animal down here. So I'm still definitely adjusting. This is my 4th winter down here now, and still it's something to get used to a little bit. So it's beautiful weather by you, though.
Oh, it's stunning. Yeah, it's a beautiful sunny day here. It's like I think it's about 30 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in freedom units, but
that's pretty damn warm, man.
It's hot.
It's hot. It's hot. And we were talking a little bit before we got on. You're a globetrotter, man. You're all over the place.
Yeah, I've had a pretty awesome year. I think this is kind of like the first year since the pandemic and all the travel restrictions were lifted where I can finally get out and go to client sites all over the world. So I'm very lucky in what I do in my line of work, that I coach some brewers individually on site. I don't do it a lot. I only usually have 1, maybe 2 clients at a time that I do that. The rest of my coaching is delivered online. And so yeah, this year's been huge. I've been to and also travel around the world, and I judge beer in beer competitions around the world. So I judged at the Australian International Beer Awards in Melbourne, the Royal Adelaide Beer and Cider Awards. I then went to Hawaii for a training course. Then I was in Johannesburg to speak at the South African Craft Brewers Conference. And then I've been, in between all that, I've been going backwards and forwards to Alice Springs, right in the center of Australia. So if you think of a map of Australia, right in the middle is where Alice Springs is. I was in Vietnam for the Brew Asia conference. Man. And yeah, just got back from a trip. I've been to Bali twice in the last 4 weeks. And so in Indonesia. So my last trip was from Brisbane, I'm on the east coast of Australia, to Alice Springs, down to Melbourne, up to Indonesia, to Bali, and then back home. And that's it. I'm done for the year. So I'm going to enjoy this delicious Moff's Summer Ale. There we go.
Beautiful.
This is probably one of the most awarded beers in Australia by Moffat Beach Brewing Company. And it's delicious.
What style beer is it?
I would probably call this an Australian style pale ale.
Okay.
So if you have a look at the Brewers Association style guidelines, because most commercial brewing competitions are judged under those style guidelines, kind of light, nice, fruity, lots of tropical fruit hop there. It's 4.5% ABV. It'll be nice and golden in color, very light bodied. It's just perfect for the weather here. It's just crushable. So yeah. It's really, really good.
You know, weather is such a big driving factor for beer style, right? I remember I went to New Orleans like 10 years ago, and I got together with a bunch of college buddies, and they knew I was in the brewing industry. And so, you know, we go to the liquor store, we're going to buy beers and whatnot. And they want to buy all these crazy beers because, you know, I'm the beer guy. And so they're buying barrel aged beers, they're buying 10% beers and all this stuff. And I'm like, guys,
Yes.
it's 98 degrees and 100% humidity. Like, you just walk outside and it's essentially just soup. Okay. Like, we need to find something light here. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
I appreciate the fact that you want to buy me something special, but how about we just buy something that, you know, we can actually consume with weather like that?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. A lot of the beer styles, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to Australia at all.
No.
No, come out. It's great. You'll have a ball.
For sure.
So a lot of the beer styles you get in Australia are either geared towards the weather or the taxation system, which influence so many beers around the world. So
okay.
Our taxation system, we have 3 different tax rates, all based on alcohol by volume.
Sure.
And so we have below 3% ABV, 3 to 3.5% ABV, and then everything above 3.5%. And so we have here in my home state of Queensland what we call mid-strength beer, which is beer that's basically 3.5%, is hugely popular here because it's just so hot, and you don't want to be you wouldn't drink a 7.5%, 8%, you know, IPA, double IPA in the hot sun. You're just going to get plastered really quick.
Sure.
It's going to be a really short session, but something nice and light and crushable and 3.5%, you drink it happily all day and that sort of thing. So that's kind of like, you see a lot of that. You see a lot of, like, most of the craft beer in Australia is somewhere between 4 and 5% ABV.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit out that varies outside that. Of course, you know, we've got the same styles and that sort of thing that you guys brew here, but it's just sort of like the daily drinkers that the consumers just gravitate towards is just geared towards the weather mostly, you know. So
man, I feel like that's the dream. Like, I mean, me personally, I would much rather. I remember when I first got into home brewing, you know, I brewed some higher ABV beers, but then I started diving into those traditional British beers. Right. So, you know, bitter, mild, and making, you know, 3.5% beer. It's just such a, and especially for coming from our drinking culture, it's like, almost like it might seem a silly thing, but it's almost like a liberating beer style to drink, right? Because you could actually just drink, like, it makes it so far easier to drink socially, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's because it's one of those deals, you know, when I first started getting into craft beer, and I mean, it was my own fault, but I mean, you know, I'm like, wait, beer can be 9%, you know, and so I'm buying all these big winter warmers and Belgian stuff, you know what I mean? But I mean, that's a really, for me, that's a really beautiful full range for beers like that. So that taxation system is, because it sounds similar to what I'm familiar with as far as UK beer goes. Is that there's a historical connection there, I'm guessing?
Oh, it's pretty similar, yeah. So, you know, our tax is based on ABV, and then we pay a dollar figure per liter of ethanol.
Okay.
So the stronger the beer, the higher the tax.
Definitely. Is there any cask culture there? You know, cask beers? No,
not really.
For sure.
Some breweries try it, but you know, usually what you wind up with is like a degassed keg that goes through a beer engine.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen too much. We give the Poms, the English as we call them, a little bit of stick about you know, drinking warm beer and that sort of thing, because it's just not what we do, you know. So.
Well, I think there's a climate thing there, man. You know what I mean? When it's warmer weather, you want something colder. You know, it makes something, you know, 50 degrees F, 55 degrees F cellar temp. It makes it a little less appealing, you know, when it's you know, 90 degrees F or 30 some C where you are right now, you know.
Definitely, but pale lager and pale ale makes up the majority of the craft beer market here in Australia, and for good reason. We just you know, like down south in Melbourne and that sort of thing. Sure, it gets cold in the winter and stuff like that, and I don't know. Some people call it stout season.
Sure.
I'll happily drink stout in the summer. I don't care, you know.
Sure.
Sure. But you know, for the most part, you know, what happens in the colder parts of Australia is that beer consumption actually decreases in the winter.
Okay.
And increases in the summer. So there's that sort of peaks and troughs there in terms of beer consumption. So it's really interesting how it works. But
so as you travel, and this is always one of those things, there's something very attractive to me when you talk about the traveling that you do for work. I'm assuming on some level you have to have that in your blood a little bit, enjoying jet setting a little bit like that.
Well, I'm quite fortunate that I don't have to worry too much about it. I don't have 17 children like you've got, and
oh, you've done your research.
yeah. Or you know, don't have a you know, anything really to worry about, so that I can. It can afford me the ability to go and do what I do and that sort of thing. So so I'm quite lucky in that regard. And I guess perhaps if I had you know, a family and kids and all that sort of stuff, then maybe things would have been different. But no, but it's fine. It works fine for me. It suits me quite well. I do need to for the business as much as for you know, my own sanity and that sort of thing. It's important that I do spend some time at home and spend time with my family and my friends and all that sort of thing. I do love it, but it's kind of like short stint. And the other thing as well is I teach. So I have a second job where I'm actually a teacher at a brewing technical college here in Brisbane. And so most of my travel during semester is, so I teach brewing at TAFE Queensland, and I teach on Mondays. The state government basically owns a brewery, which is pretty awesome that the government owns a brewery. And so I teach there on Mondays, and then I'll usually fly out on Tuesday to somewhere in the world and then fly back in on Sunday so I can teach again on the Monday. Yeah. So, yeah. But there's that, and also, you know, having to sort of maintain my my coaching community as well, right? Because I've got you know, 60 professional brewers in my coaching program who you know, need support and guidance, and I run you know, lots of new content with them quite frequently, so I have to keep the momentum up on that as well. So being at home is you know, as often as I can is good, but I do enjoy the travel.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gotten into a little chatting about the coaching work that you do. Let's jump back a little bit and chat a little bit about how kind of your path into the industry.
Yeah, so I was a pretty avid home brewer for about 15 years in sort of the late 90s, and then in the early 2000s, I sort of started doing brew on premise, where you'd go to the brew on premise shop, and they'd have the 44-gallon drums with malt extract in them and some kettles, and you go and brew 50 liters worth of beer. And when I was doing that, I was like, the motivation for brewing was a financial one. It was just like, let's just make cheap beer, you know.
Sure.
And kind of like my father, really. And so like my first exposure to home brewing was my father home brewing. We lived in an old Queenslander house. So basically it's a house that's on stilts. Okay. And he had some bottles conditioning underneath my bedroom, and I was 4 years old, and this is on the army base. My father was a regimental sergeant major in the Australian Army. Okay. And the bottles exploding underneath the floor of my bedroom when I'm 4 years old at 4 o'clock in the morning, you know. And his motivation for homebrewing, he was just cheap. You know?
Sure.
Cheap beer.
Well, you know? and homebrewing culture there, I mean, it seems like it has pretty solid roots. I remember when I started getting into homebrewing, early mid 2000s. That was when I started listening to the Brewing Network podcast. And so I would listen to the Sunday session live and whatnot. And they always make me feel a little bit better about the technical difficulties I have, because whatever time I'm trying to remember the Sunday session was supposed to start, it was always a little bit longer. I think they were dealing with it. It may have been a little harder back then. I don't think they just had to jump on StreamYard. But I was always surprised by how large of an Australian contingent there was in the chat, in the message rooms back then. So it seems like there's quite a homebrewing culture there.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I actually got to meet all of the Brewing Network guys when we had the Australian National Homebrew Conference in Canberra, in our nation's capital, about 10 years ago now, and 9 or 10 years ago, and that was huge, and there was just there's 800 or 900 people there, and it was really cool. So, and this year the Australian National Homebrew Conference is going to be in Brisbane, in my hometown. And so we're sort of helping put together like a international contingent of speakers, and it's looking pretty good. So the homebrewing's always been huge. I mean, I was homebrewing, doing the brew on premise thing, and pouring this brown coloured goop into a kettle, and wondering, what is this and what's it made from? I had no idea. And there wasn't really much in the way of internet forums and all that sort of stuff, because homebrewing back then was just coming out of its phase where brewing was all this very secretive thing. And, you'd get a recipe which had been photocopied 20 times. It was all really blurry and all that sort of stuff. And that's how old I am, And so rather than sort of learn online, I went to university and studied brewing postgraduate. I did a postgraduate degree in brewing. I started at Edith Cowan University in Perth, because that's where I was living at the time, on the west coast of Australia. And I deferred that for a year. I went over to the UK with the future ex Mrs. Henderson, and we went for a year, worked in the UK. I was working in IT at the time. And they closed that brewing school whilst I was away. And so when I came back, I transferred into the University of Ballarat, which is now called Federation University, and did it was the graduate certificate of brewing under Pete Aldred, and I graduated from that in 2008.
Sure.
And that's when I got into the industry. So. Yeah. I've worked at lots of different breweries. I've been assistant brewer at Prickly Moses. I became head brewer of a big contract brewery in Geelong, in Victoria. And then I stupidly started my own gypsy brewing company called Brew Cult, and did that for about 5 years until it went broke. And after that, was fortunate enough to get a job at a really big production brewery here at Stone and Wood Brewing, which is very, very big, very popular brewery. And was just working on the floor after the business went broke. And then that was a 1-year contract. And when that ended, I decided to start doing a bit of consulting, which then turned into coaching.
Yeah.
And that's why I do what I do now. And it's good fun.
That's awesome, man. And what I love about your story is I love hearing the entrepreneurial edge in there, and because I think about myself, and it wasn't until I started doing online content where I like to say that for a long time, because I taught for 10 years prior to becoming a brewer, and then I'm brewing for another decade, and I felt like for 20 years I was letting my career happen to me. And not to sound cheesy, but one of the offshoots of saying, yes, I have the heart of a teacher. I love teaching. I want to spread information. But also I knew that, starting to put things out could also, have career benefit for me as well. Right. It can increase your visibility. It's essentially an online resume, this, that, and the other thing. Right. So I loved hearing that in your story through the industry, where there is kind of that entrepreneurial look for you with starting your own place, and quite frankly having the guts to do it, because I haven't had it in 12 years. I mean, you kick around the idea and whatnot, but when it comes down to it, I mean, it's no joke. And I'm not telling you that. I mean, it's no joke, but when you're around long enough, you end up seeing when something goes wrong at midnight or 3 a.m, the guy that owns the brewery is the one that has to take care of it. You know what I mean? Right. It comes down on you,
I mean, I mean, yeah, of course, the Rockstar Brewer Academy and that sort of thing. And what I do is very entrepreneurial and that sort of thing. But that's not really how I think about it. Like, kind of the way that I think about it is that when I was a young and younger, impressionable brewer, I still didn't have any hair, but and was this assistant brewer, and I was really passionate about brewing. And I was a sponge for knowledge and information. I just wanted information, and there just wasn't anywhere around to get sort of reliable technical brewing information. Because like you look at the options that you've got, you can, if you're someone who say, let's say you're building a brewery or you're working at a brewery or something like that. What do you do when you've got a brewing technical question? You can go and ask a local friendly head brewer from another brewery in your hometown and that sort of thing, and they're going to help you and that sort of thing. But if you utilize that resource too much, you're going to start to wear out your welcome.
Sure.
And you're eventually not going to get the information that you want. Every brewer's got their own secrets, even though they're quite open. Every brewer has their own bits and pieces that they choose not to share, which is fine. Or you can go and read a lot of books. You can do a lot of online research. You can go onto YouTube. You'll probably either find you or I.
Sure, yeah.
And or you can go to the professional brewer forums, which I don't find those communities particularly healthy. Because if you go and ask a question on one of those forums, you'll get 6 different answers to the question, and everyone says every one of those answers, they say my way is the right way. If you don't do it my way, it's shit.
Sure.
And and then lowest common denominator is professional brewers going to home brewer forums and seeking advice from home brewers. Sure. Just professional brewers should not be seeking advice from home brewers, period.
Tell me why.
And so I think that there's a lot of opinion and conjecture and theory, and not really backed up by the science and research and fact.
Okay, right? For sure.
For a lot of things. Okay, so if I was in a situation where I was having a particular brewing technical issue, I would probably go and utilize the MBAA, back catalog of technical quarterly. That's all searchable and stuff like that, where a classic example of that is Hop Creek, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Hop Creek was discovered in 1896 or something like that. It's been around for ages, and and brewers have a really good knack. We're really, really good at forgetting knowledge and then having to go and relearn it again. We're idiots, and so that's kind of like. So as far as like homebrewers go, look, don't get me wrong, I'm a homebrewer as well. A lot of respect for homebrewers, and
definitely
happy to share lots of information with them, and that sort of thing. But when you are a professional brewer and you are making beer and you're exchanging that beer for money, right? I don't think it's appropriate to seek advice from amateurs in that regard, because you need to seek advice from a fellow professional and that sort of thing. And that's kind of where the Rockstar Brewer Academy sort of, started. And so, one of the features of being in the Rockstar Brewer Academy is we have a private Facebook group where members can ask questions and get answers. Sometimes it's from me, sometimes it's from another member in the community. And we've got some sort of fundamental rules that really make that community really, really healthy. So, for example, rule number 1 is every brewer is different, and we respect that, right? Which means the person. Rule number 2, every brewery and its equipment is different, and we respect that.
Yeah.
Right. Rule number 3 is that there's no right way or wrong way to do a job in a brewery. There's your way, and what you figure out is the best way. And then rule number 4 is you've got to give to get, which basically means if you learn something new, or you have an experience which makes an improvement to your beer, then you're obliged to share it. And we kind of break down those walls of having secrets and that sort of thing. Sure. And it makes it really the types of conversations that we have in the private Facebook community are very, very different to those that I've seen in the public forums and that sort of thing. Because, People behave differently. They're paying to be there for a start,
Yeah.
which makes it
Yeah.
completely different. And we respect the rules, and it just works. I don't know, it just works. It's really cool.
Sure. Sure. No, and you know, I think one of the things that you mentioned in the rules when kind of talking about, you know, finding people to work with, you know, so much of, well, increasingly, you know, at the pro breweries that I've worked at, the equipment is so fundamentally different than the equipment that I had at home. I'm usually talking more about process issues than I am anything else. And the process is just so fundamentally different than what I was doing at home. Now, granted, I'm still taking malted barley and converting starch to sugar. Sure, you know, different things like that. So, I mean, there's the, you know, the fundamentals, the baseline, but the ways that we do that are very, very different, right? And there's a bit of a sliding scale too, because some people are running on kind of super homebrew systems and stuff like that, you know. But no, I think that's a really valid point.
Yeah, exactly. Like my smallest client is on I think it's a 1 barrel system, and makes maybe 100 barrels a year.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Some of my clients are actually they're breweries in planning that are in their sort of late stages of planning. So, like, the best time that I can have an effect, like, because if you're a person who has aspirations to go and build a brewery, and you've never been a professional brewer before, it's a very daunting task. You know, all of a sudden you become a brewery engineer. You've got to select equipment. You've got to do your floor plan, and then you've got to go and commission the brewery, and then you've got to make beer that you're going to exchange for money.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And that changes. You know, you're no longer a home brewer. You're a professional brewer. You're no longer a brewer. You're a food manufacturer, right? And so there's a mind shift that needs to happen, and that relationship between the brewer and the drinker has to change.
Sure.
Right. And so you can't. I don't believe that you can be like a home brewer and expect to go and build a brewery. So I work in fact, probably around half of my clients in Beer Quality Bootcamp. They come to me when they've got their premises ready to go, and they've signed a lease and they can take possession of the property, or they're able to imminently, and they've just signed off on ordering all of their stainless steel and all their equipment and that sort of thing. So while they're waiting for their equipment to arrive, then they can come and work with me for 60 days. And I help them implement a quality system, so that there's some tools there on recipe scaling and carbonation and dissolved oxygen, water chemistry, all that sort of stuff, so that whilst they're waiting for the equipment to be fabricated, they can go and build these quality systems out. Then their equipment arrives. Then they can go and get busy and commission the brewery. And then and as soon as the brewery's commissioned, then your doors open and you start brewing beer for real. And they've got the quality system. And so what's going to happen is the first batches of beer that come out the door of that brand new brewery are of a really good standard, because consumers, like beer drinkers, will always go to a brewery once because it's new, right? But if the beer's shit, they won't come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you've got to make sure that your first batches of beer that you brew, that come out the door of your brewery, are they're never going to be perfect. And the first 12 months of running a brewery are a nightmare, and you're going to put beer down the drain, and that's normal because you're dialing things in. But they've got to be of a decent standard. Otherwise, you've got all these craft beer Facebook groups and stuff where they're posting pictures of, beers that they're drinking, and like let's say you make a beer and there's no foam on it, and people go, "Oh, there's no foam," or "Is the beer's at flat?" And then they tell each other, and I think your beers have to be, on point as best as you can right from the start, and that helps to create a good, sustainable business.
Sure, and I really think you nailed it, man. And I think it's one of the underrated things, and potentially one of the more valuable. Sure, and that's not to understate, brewery planning, layout, and everything like that. But the actual system that you're using in house, that's a big deal. You know what I mean? I mean, it's really what you're doing. So, like, right now, And one of the things I've been passionate about over the years, I've always loved training new people into the industry. And that's one of the things that whenever I see somebody that I'm training and they can, I mean, you don't have to lose your mind and like, you know, start dancing around every time you appropriately CIP a tank, but you have to be able to gain a certain amount of satisfaction out of carrying out that process well, right?
Yes.
Like, because it's fundamentally what we're doing, you know, and a lot of times, and listen, hot side is important. And you want to be on point hot side as well. But you and I both know that once it goes to the cold side, it doesn't matter how good the hot side is. If the cold side isn't on point, you're going to have issues. So ultimately, it is a process game. And I think sometimes people don't like that because they love the artistic side of it so much.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the heart and soul of it is still SOPs.
Correct, and that's a common theme that I when I'm talking to brewers is the very first thing that they'll sort of talk about. They'll say, "Oh, my recipes are really, really good. You know, I've got some good recipes." I don't really care about your recipes, right? Because the thing is that there's this misconception that improving recipes improves quality, but it's not. It's improving process improves quality. You keep your recipe the same, you make that same beer better. That's how you get quality improvements in your beer. And the thing is that I literally say to lots of people, it's like, I don't care about your recipes. I've seen them all. I've worked for one of the biggest contract breweries, you know, in Australia, and I've worked in one of the biggest craft breweries in Australia. Seen all the recipes in all of the liquor stores right across the country. They're all pretty much the same, you know, sure. But what makes a difference between a brewery that's making okay beer to a brewery that's making really, really good beer is not the equipment. Don't need a lab. You don't need anything fancy or anything like that. It's just good adherence to good process.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
And that makes all the difference. And you know, and depending upon the number of people that are involved in the brewery. So let's say you've got a one-man show, you know, single person operator. They're not going to have written SOPs, right? But you know, one of the things that I do is sort of give them a framework in which they can write their beer recipe and their process independent of the equipment that it's brewed on.
Yeah.
Right. And so they actually start to think about, how do I get this? How do the brewery sort of, you know, without thinking about it, the brewery becomes a black box. You know, like, as you said, people focus on hot side, on brew day. They go brew work, they throw it in the tank, something happens, and then beer pops out the other end. And you go and smell and taste that beer. And if you smell and taste that beer and you go, something wrong with that, you know, it's too late to fix it. Right. And so what we do is we sort of change the way people think and sort of lift the veil over that black box and make the brewery transparent, so you know exactly what a beer should look like every step of the process, so the brewer's fully in control and getting some really good outcomes. So yeah, it's good fun.
Definitely. And this kind of hints at a question I'd like to ask people, because I think people have, from the outside looking in, whether you're home brewing or not, people always have a different idea about what we do professionally. What is kind of the big thing that people don't realize about what we do as brewers?
It's very, so in terms of being process focused, right? There is some creativity to the job of being a professional brewer, but it's much less than what one would think if one wasn't a professional brewer. I love that mug, by the way.
Thanks, man. Available in the Adam Makes Beer store, by the way. So yeah.
It's just you taking a sip out of your own head. That was really cool.
FYI, just so you know, my kids got that. My kids and my wife. So my kids are now old enough that they can understand why it's funny to, one, have my big stupid smile on it. The other side says Brew Daddy on it. So they're old enough to also kind of get the two sides of that kind of daddy feel, and so they know it's funny and a little creepy. But yeah, that's what it is. So yeah,
fantastic. So for me, like, take take brew day, for instance, right? So when you're on the brew house, there's a lot of noise happening in the brewery. You might be CIPing a tank, you might be cleaning your work line or something like that, or you might be getting yeast ready. And there's lots of different processes happening on brew day. And even on the brew house itself, there's lots of things that need to be monitored. And a lot of brewers, when they find themselves on a big brew house, for a while, they get lost in the noise of brew day. And so, one of the fundamentals that I teach at the Rockstar Brewer Academy is like, okay, forget about the noise. You're only going to focus on 3 numbers, right? These are your 3 work quality numbers, right? Which I call the sacred trilogy, which is basically your work pH, your original gravity, and the temperature of the work. You get those 3 things right, 90% of the time you've set yourself up for a nice healthy ferment. The work's there for a nice healthy fermentation, and assuming the yeast and that sort of thing is fine. And for a lot of brewers, it's very liberating for them, because all of a sudden they realize that the hot side on brew day, when you're doing work production, it's suddenly a process, and you take the noise out of it and you give 3 very distinct targets, and all of a sudden they've got something that they can aim for. And when you and for a professional brewer, when you hit the numbers, it feels good, man.
Oh yeah, man. For sure.
It feels good. You know it. I know it. I love it.
Definitely. So we've been talking about the coaching work that you do. What do you feel is personally, and this is one of those things, sometimes I think people don't want to sound like they're tooting their own horn or anything like that, but the reality is each one of us is bringing a unique skill set to the table. What do you think it is about your skill set that helps you be successful with the coaching that you're doing?
Which part of my skill set makes me successful as a coach?
Yeah.
That's actually a really good question. I actually really enjoy taking really complex topics and having it swirl around in my mind for a little while, and then being able to communicate that in a much more simplistic manner, right?
Sure.
Water chemistry is a classic example. You've read the water book, right? And
Yep.
It's a pretty tough read. It's an excellent book, but it's a really tough read. If you've got insomnia, go read half a page of that. You'll be asleep in 5 minutes, right? It took me ages to read it, because I'd read half a page in bed and I'd be like, oh, it's a lot, and that's no disrespect to John Palmer or Colin Kaminsky or anything like that. It's a really, really good book. But it's just a lot to digest. And so with the brewing water chemistry part of Beer Quality Bootcamp is basically getting rid of a lot of the misconceptions around water chemistry, and having, again, some clear targets on what you should be doing when you're trying to build a water profile for a specific style of beer that you might be brewing, right? And so again, it comes down to three numbers, right? So when there's a lot of mistakes that brewers make. They try to replicate historical city water profiles, Pilsen and Dortmund and Dublin and Burton-on-Trent. Like, who the hell would want to brew with water that's 600 parts per million of sulfate? I mean, those brewers, they hated that water, and all they did was, they just brewed a style of beer that just suited the water. They didn't have the understanding back then that they could manipulate the water or reverse osmosis. Probably wasn't invented then. It's pretty terrible water. Anyway, so I disregard historical, brewing city water profiles. I don't think about that at all. And so the way that I think about a water profile for a beer is 3 things. So first one is the sulfate to chloride ratio.
Yes.
More sulfate means accentuating hop bitterness, hop flavor. When you have a sulfate to chloride ratio less than 1, it's going to accentuate malt. Okay. And so you can determine whether you want a beer to be malty or bitter, right? The second one is the wort pH. because the wort pH, yeast will drop the pH during fermentation, and so it's not wort pH, it's beer pH, which is your kind of target number. But wort pH is an influencer on it. So acidity in things that we eat and drink makes a huge difference to the flavor of it, right?
Yeah.
And so by being able to manipulate the beer pH, we can take a pale lager, for instance, right? I don't know if you've ever, pale malts tend to mash at a very high pH if you don't do any water adjustment or add acid or anything like that. And if you can mash and you can boil and you can pitch yeast and it'll ferment. And if the beer pH of that nice pale lager is quite high, up around 4.4 or something like that, it's going to taste flabby and lifeless and not crisp, right? And I see it a lot. It's like, but if you get a little bit of acidity into that lager, all of a sudden it becomes crisp and refreshing and nice, and that's what why beer pH is so important. And the third one is calcium concentration, right? So calcium concentration is important because it's kind of like the indicator as to the parts per million of sulfate and chloride that you're going to have, right? Okay. So you could have a water profile which has got, like, let's say you're doing a pale lager, for instance, that's got a 0.8 kind of multi-sulfate to chloride ratio, and it might have about maybe 80 or 90 parts per million of chloride and 60 or 70 of sulfate.
Sure.
But if I dial that up so it's 200 parts per million of chloride and 150 parts per million of sulfate, in that same pale lager, that beer is going to taste very, very different.
Yeah.
And the minerality of that beer is going to be very, very different. And the reason is because it's the calcium concentration. So it's kind of like the gain dial on sulfate and chloride.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's how I do it. So this is how it comes back to it. So it sounds really scientific and that sort of thing. But what I find a lot of fun is this is the creative part, right? So it comes back to, so when I'm writing a beer recipe, I start to think about the water that goes in it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what style of beer it happens to be. I know that I can, I'll think about where I want the sulfate to chloride ratio. Do I want it to err towards malt or bitterness? Where do I want that beer pH to be? And what's the roundness, minerality of that beer? And these are the things that I think about as part of the recipe writing process. And so, I'm a massive fan of Martin Brungard's Brewing Water spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I love it. It's just like, it's the best $10 that a brewer can spend is to go get the paid version of that.
Yep.
And so coming back to breaking down complex topics into simple things, right? So I've created a process to use Brewing Water to make any water profile for any beer style and do it in 6 easy steps.
Nice.
In Brewing Water. It's just, and the outcomes that I get from my beers, that my clients get from their beers, like literally what they do is they'll get this knowledge, right? And then I'll say, don't change anything else in your recipe. Just change the water and go brew it exactly the same again. And they come back a few weeks later and they go, wow, that was huge difference. Sure. And I'm like, well, of course it's a huge difference, because if you've got a beer, like water is the most abundant ingredient in beer. Yep. And if you've got a beer that's 5% alcohol, it's 95% water. It's kind of important.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's such a big thing. And just real quick, I'm seeing some new names. Welcome to James from the Philippines. And we've got Jay in here. We've got Jim, September and June, Bondi, Jamie Tripp. It's a list of all-stars in here. We got Craig. We've got Rich, Jim, Bill Nova. Good to see everybody. We're going to be getting to some questions as we go. One thing that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, you were talking pale lager and pH, and you were saying that getting it into that 4.4 range can make that beer be a little bit flabby. One of the things that I always love about brewing and how it always makes me think more like on the culinary side, right? Like balance in beer is the same thing as balance in food, right? It's acidity, it's sweetness. It's all these different things. So
Absolutely.
so just kind of for reference point, and I know we're talking very generally here, but if we're talking like adjunct lager, you're going to have 30, maybe, well, let's say 20 to 40% rice or corn in something, something in the low 4% wise. Kind of, what are you looking for target pH in something like that? How low do you like to go?
So adjunct lagers will so for an all malt pale lager,
sure,
4.2 is my kind of magic number. Once you start putting adjunct in, you don't have that buffering capacity. So around 3.8, 3.9 starts to become a thing. But this is the really key thing, right? So there's this misconception that a lot of people think, oh, your beer pH is in the 3s, it's going to be sour.
Sure.
So pH and acidity are two different things, right? And so pH is a concentration of H plus hydronium ions, right? It's an indicator of acidity or alkalinity, but it's not the measure of acidity or alkalinity.
Sure.
So if I was going to get so the way in which you measure the acidity of beer is titratable acidity. So you basically get a beer sample, you get a burette with some sodium hydroxide, and you neutralize the acid, and you measure the amount of sodium hydroxide, and that gives you it's usually going to be grams per liter of lactic acid equivalent, right? Which is how beer acidity is measured. So if you're drinking a pale lager and you drink an adjunct lager with a pH of say 3.8, 3.9 versus an all malt equivalent, identical except just take the adjunct out, that's going to be a pH of 4.2. The titratable acidity of those two beers is probably going to be near to identical, right? It's titratable acidity is what you taste.
Sure.
Right? You don't taste pH because have a think about this, right? So Coca-Cola, right? Do you know what the pH of Coca-Cola is?
It's low as hell. I don't know off the top.
What do you think it might be?
I think it. I think it's at. My guess is it's got to at least be maybe high 2s is my guess.
Yes, 2.8. 2.8.
Yeah.
Well done.
It's insane. It's insane.
But here's the thing, and that's why pH is not a measure of sourness, right?
Sure.
Or tartness or acidity or crispness in a beer, right? Because Coca-Cola is not sour, but has a pH of 2.8, right? And so it's really interesting. And so I've even seen a brewery, I won't name them because it was a pretty dumb experiment. They wanted to get a beer so sour that the pH, normally sour beers, right? Like, Berliner Weiss or Kettle Sour or something, drops to around 3.3 or something like that. And, barley or malted grain beverages usually buffer around 3.3 for a very, 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 very long time. You've got to throw a lot of acid in for it to break through that, right? And they tried to get a beer down below 3. And I tried this beer, and it you could feel the fizz inside your mouth as it was stripping the enamel off your teeth. And I went, this is just stupid. So and took a pH of it, and lo and behold, it was just below 3. And I went, wow, that's really low. That's impressive. Then I went and titrated the beer, and it had 24 grams per liter of lactic acid equivalent in it.
Man.
Right? So a typical sour beer has around 3 to 5.
That's wild.
So they had their pH meter out thinking low pH equals more sour, but it's a real testament to the fact that the pH only dropped 0.3, 0.4, but the amount of acid that it took to achieve that was huge and probably maybe not food safe. I don't know.
Yeah, right. So we were talking about, food grade acids there briefly when you mentioned lactic acid. Are you a lactic acid, phosphoric acid guy? What do you tend to like to do to drive that mash pH lower?
Oh, that's you're asking all the good questions here. So my answer to that is it depends, because different acids taste different, right? So if you got, say, half a dozen glasses of water, right, and you got your pH meter and you dose down with, say, lactic acid and phosphoric acid, and don't try this at home, sulfuric acid, and vinegar, which is acetic acid and that sort of thing, you go taste those glasses of water with the pH modified with those different acids, they're going to taste different. And again, that comes down to what you're trying to achieve with the flavor of a beer. It comes back to the creative part of it. So it varies for me. Mostly lactic acid is my personal preference because I like the taste of it.
Okay.
And I forgot to mention citric acid as well as common food grade acid. Maybe one of those brewers who make seltzer.
Sure.
And they're all going to taste different. So for me, most pale beers, most pale lager, I prefer lactic acid because I like the softness of the acidity. I like the creaminess of it, and it just tastes good. Phosphoric acid is the acid that you'll find in soda, in soft drinks, and it tastes different. For me, it's more sort of fuzzy down the side of the tongue. It's a stronger acid, so you need less. But I've had some totally decent beers done with phosphoric acid, and there's nothing wrong with using it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I've seen brewers try to brew pale ales using citric acid to try and accentuate citrus flavors in a hoppy pale ale.
Interesting.
Which was a very interesting concept. Did it work? Yeah, I probably wouldn't do it citric acid by itself, but I think there's something to be explored of combining lactic and citric acid in like a hoppy little pale ale, just to try and accentuate some of those tropical fruit and citrus flavors and that sort of thing, Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to things like acetic acid is a very, very, very strong acid. My brother is a vinegar maker, and so we actually, when I started my brewing company back in sort of 2013, the very first beer that I released was a balsamic Baltic porter called Acid Freaks.
Okay.
And so basically we put balsamic vinegar into a Baltic porter, and it completely changed the flavor. But it was just the tiniest amount of acetic acid. It was like 0.2% acidity. Mm-hmm. Whereas you go buy vinegar from the supermarket, it's 6% acidity by weight, right?
Yeah. And
so it was just a puff, but it was just enough just to manipulate the flavor to bring out these really awesome stewed fruits, fruitcake kind of flavors in this beer. It was phenomenal. And it was not meant to be a sour.
Yeah.
And people called it sour. I was like, it's not really meant to be sour. It's just that little bit of acidity is there just to tweak the flavor a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah. So in the travels that you're doing, I don't know what the question is, is there a through line? Is there a commonality between the beers that you're that you're seeing brewed around the world? Or are there specific differences? Are there things that everybody seems to be chasing, right? Or are there kind of different goals from place to place? Maybe that's a little too broad, but if there's something in there that you could chat on.
Yeah, that's really good. It's a good question. So everybody's trying to get more hop flavor out of their beers, particularly their hazies and stuff like that. It's a really common theme.
So are you finding that hazy is basically everywhere now?
Yeah. And I don't mind the odd hazy. I'm not
sure
anti-hazy. In fact, I have a lot of respect for brewers who can execute that really, really well, because there's so much hop aroma and flavor, particularly derived from dry hopping.
Yes.
And those aroma compounds are really, really, really delicate and can just be like, the common thing is, like, I get asked quite a lot is, how can I extract more hop aroma from my dry hopping? And the first thing I'll say is, watch your dissolved oxygen pickup. You watch your oxygen ingress, because if you just get on top of that, then you're not going to be wasting so much money on, 5 pounds per barrel of, Citra or whatever you're trying to achieve and that sort of thing. I like with dry hopping, I love great hop aroma and flavor. That Moth Summer Ale, which I just drank, was phenomenal. And but when I'm personally brewing a beer, my personal challenge is to try and extract the most amount of hop aroma and flavor from the least amount of hops.
That makes sense.
And it's not a budget thing. It's just a personal challenge thing. You know, it's like I just want to be able to pick the right hop combination, dry hop at the right part of the process, and watch that oxygen ingress like an absolute hawk, and have a great beer outcome from it. You know, and that happens a lot with a lot of my my clients, my members of the community, is they start to really be mindful of dissolved oxygen pickup, and almost all of them, none of them have a DO meter, right?
I was gonna say that's one of it's really interesting that you're talking about this, and I want to dive in a little bit, because it is that's one of those pieces of equipment. And this is back to this conversation before, when we're talking about everybody's brewing with different equipment. Dissolved oxygen is a big one, because very percentage wise, very few people have the ability to measure dissolved oxygen, whether they're whether it be in their liquid, whether it be in purging a tank, different things like that. Do you have any tips for people that are finding themselves in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. My advice to them is think small, act big. Okay, so when you're thinking about ways in which air, which is the form of oxygen that is going to ingress your beer, like, you need to think about the amount of air ingress that's going to cause enough oxygen ingress to damage your beer, right? So you would have a DO meter at Sonder, yeah?
Yes. Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
First time in 12, 13 years of brewing that I've had a DO meter. It's pretty sweet.
Excellent. What do you got?
It's a Pentair something or other.
Oh, Gehältermeter. You got the Gehältermeter. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has like
your German's not great.
Yeah, it's like a big block, and there's a handle on it. And yeah,
they're really good. They're awesome. I like the Gehältermeter. I like the C-Box. They're all really good. The Hamilton Beverly, you've got the Metler Toledo. They're all decent, and they have their pros and cons and that sort of thing. But they're all really expensive, because the amount of oxygen that can damage beer is really, really small. So therefore, you need a really, really sensitive instrument to be able to measure that small amount of DO. And that's why DO meters are really, really expensive. You go buy the Anton Parr C-Box, that's a $25,000, $30,000 instrument. Right? And for a lot of brewers, particularly small breweries that are starting out, that's beyond their budget. Now, I'll come back to that in a second. So the interesting thing is, is for me, 100 parts per billion TPO is that high level where I'm like, that I probably would be reluctant to release a beer if it had gotten more than 100 parts per billion of dissolved oxygen ingress, right? So if air is 21% oxygen, right, in our atmosphere, how much air ingress equals 100 ppb of DO, right? And it's basically, it comes down to 0.45 milliliters of air ingress per 1,000 liters of beer, right? And so if you're using freedom units, so that's 0.018 fluid ounces in 10 barrels of beer. Do I do the freedom units? Okay.
Dude, first of all, I don't. That phrase makes me laugh every time I hear it. It's just very, very funny. But yes, yeah. I mean, you're good.
I have to work.
You
with
caught
both
me.
Because I have
you caught me
all
off
over the
guard,
world,
man.
so.
I'm dialed in. I'm listening to what you're talking about. Then you hit me with freedom units, and it got me off for a
freedom
second.
Units.
But you're good. Yeah.
Well, I think you're doing really good, because I think I saw the other day that Sonder is metric, and you've had to
Sonder's metric.
Reseat yourself. And
I'm still not. I'm remembering my numbers for what I need to do process wise there, but they're still not connected. You know what I mean? At some point, I'm going to connect those dots. But I'm checking other boxes right now for sure.
You'll get there. Just practice. It's all good. I'm fine. I work in lots of different breweries that use Plato or volumes of CO2 versus grams per liter of CO2, and in my head I can just flip between them. It's not really a problem and that sort of thing. And to be honest, there's pros and cons of both. I'm not anti. Like, I call it freedom units because I think it's just funny.
Yeah, it is funny. It is.
And but I prefer, if I in my teaching brewery, we're 100% metric. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it's this tiny amount of dissolved oxygen. Less than half a milliliter of air ingress for 10 hectoliters or 1,000 liters of beer or 10 barrels of beer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a lot, right? And so think small, act big means you got to find that half a milliliter or that 0.018 fluid ounces, right? And it might be the well inside of a butterfly valve. If you go hook up some CO2 to a triclover, if you picked up a butterfly valve and turned it like that and turned it into like a something representing a really very large and heavy shot glass, there's about 60 milliliters of air, which you're just going to go straight
100%, 100%.
And you've already done your budget by 30 or 40 times just in that well, right? And it's things like the sight glass you usually see on the side of a tank where there's like a T-piece on the bottom valve which goes up to the CIP arm. It tells you how much product is in the tank. People don't purge that, Or it's the fact that you've just got your CO2 regulator out for the day and you haven't pulled through a bunch of CO2 through the CO2 line because it might have air in it, right? And that's think small, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to be on your A game all the time. Think small. Where are the little nooks and crannies where there might be air? And act big means purge the shit out of it with CO2.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Think small, act big. And so you don't. It's like if you're a brewery where if you're big enough that oxygen ingress will ruin a tank of beer. And the financial implication of that is just 1/4 of the cost of a DO meter. It's time to get a DO meter. And I find it really funny that, when I say, why don't you have a DO meter? And they go, I can't afford it. I'm like, you're literally filling this tank of beer every like 2 to 3 weeks. It's costing you $10,000 or $15,000 in raw materials and labor and energy and tax and all that sort of stuff that goes into it. And you're putting all of that at risk because you can't afford it. And, and then my next question is usually, well, how much did you spend on your stainless steel? And I go, I spent $500,000 on my stainless steel. That's great. So you're not going to spend another 3% on top of that to monitor the dissolved oxygen ingress? That's the thing. And the breweries, even the very, very small breweries, like my good friend Smokey and Lukey at Currumbin Valley Brewing down on the Gold Coast here, they're only allowed to produce 40,000 litres of beer per year. So that's 400 barrels per year, right? And they have a Gehalter meter, right? Because they realise that, because here's the quandary with it, right? Is that the smaller your batch size, right, the more any oxygen ingress is magnified, okay? Homebrewers have it super, super tough. If you're doing a 5-gallon, 20-liter batch, they have it it's really hard not to oxidize homebrew because all brewers from all different breweries of different sizes all make the same mistakes when it comes to oxygen ingress. But when that's magnified in a smaller batch of beer, then the damage is greater in terms of parts per billion because it's a ratio. Right? And one of my students, I can talk about him now because he's graduated. His name's Mason, and he works at one of my favorite breweries in Brisbane. He works for Felons, and I love their pale lager. And he was one of my students at TAFE at the Technical College, and he was working at Felons, and they had 100 hectoliter tanks, right? So 100 barrel tanks, big tanks. Yeah. And what they would do is their CO2 was on triclover, and they would just hook up to the carb stone, not purge out that space in the well of the butterfly valve, and they would just go and pump oxygen in. In 100 hectoliters of beer, and they had a C box, it didn't make a difference. But he came into my brewery on a 2.5 hectoliter, so 2 barrel tank, and he went and just did that and hooked it up the carb stone and just started carbonating a beer in a bright tank. And the DO after the transfer was, I think it was like 20 something ppb, and all of a sudden it shot up to 300. Just from the well of a butterfly valve. It's madness,
No, and I like that, and I do think that there is It's a fine line as well, because as brewers, I think you have to have this little program that's running in the back of your mind all the time, where you're trying to troubleshoot your equipment, understand, always more deeply understand the limitations of that equipment, and then things that you can do to work around that, right? And
Yes.
the small things are important, just exactly like you said. And when I train people up, and actually you've given me a much more a much better way to look at it. I say, listen, like when I was at Cartridge, the place before Sonder, I was in charge of everything. It was my processes, and I would be like, listen, before we hook up here, we need to this space needs to be purged. So we're either blowing beer through here, we're going to rig this so we're purging the whole line all the way through, something like that, right? Because I can't, and I always told them this is just one of those things that's going to make me happy, because I do know there's some oxygen in there. I don't know exactly how much, but I know I don't want it in this tank, right?
Yeah.
And I do think I do think that's a key to what we're doing, especially when you're doing things on a budget, right?
Yes.
Because not everybody has the C box, not everybody
That's
has
correct.
all these bells and whistles, and so it's almost better to kind of have this, I don't know, like we use the term like MacGyver, like I don't know if you're aware of the TV show MacGyver, right? Yeah, like you're gonna
My mom
MacGyver.
loves it.
Yeah, my grandmother loved MacGyver. So she always used to tell my brother, I think he looks like MacGyver, and I think that was a good thing. But yeah, so you have to MacGyver yourself some solutions to work with the equipment that you have. I think that's really sharp. And then the flip side is you have to be able to turn that program off when you're not at work, or at least when you don't want it running, right? You don't need that program running at 3 a.m, basically.
Yes, of course.
So
exactly. you gotta sometimes you gotta quite often, for a professional brewer, because we identify as being brewers and all that sort of thing, you gotta switch off, man.
Yeah.
It's super important. I love doing things that are not beer, and you can't lie in bed at night and just think about beer all the time. It'll drive you batty.
I agree, and I'm actually, and I'm going a little far afield right now. I've been feeling lately like, because I've been trying to do, I'm trying to do a couple different things with the channel. I definitely over the holidays, I need to pump the brakes a little bit, because you just can't have those gears grinding nonstop.
Oh shit! No, of course not.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're not brewing beer?
So most of my time is we're in this spot where, so my oldest son is 21. My kids are 21, 19, 16, 13. That's 4. And then there's a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I have 2 kids out of the house. One is wrapping up college. The other one he just got home, but he's been in LA doing like missionary work out there in LA, which is wild as a father having a child out in LA, which is no joke. And then we have the 2 that are kind of high school age that are busy with their sports stuff, and then the littles that are just being little people. So that's basically my primary unplug. I'm very lucky to have an amazing wife, amazing kids, and I've been so blessed. I have a core of friends that I thought throughout my life that everybody just had that. And I'm not talking about like guys that are, good to like go to the game with or like have a beer with. These guys are good for that too, but just people that I could call them any time of day and they're picking up. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's just life, it's kid life.
That's good.
and stuff like
being
that.
a
Yeah,
dad. Yeah,
definitely.
that's awesome.
Definitely.
I'm the same thing. Right? So I don't have kids, so I don't have the
Sure.
challenges that you have.
Sure.
But the things that I do that are not beer that I definitely make sure that I do is for me, one of these things is only very recent. I make sure, I'm hitting 50 in February. And
Okay.
so I make sure that I keep myself healthy. So I joined a gym earlier this year, and I've tried to join gyms before
Mm-hmm.
and just got really bored of it really quickly. But I've got a personal
Yeah.
trainer. His name's Cohen, and he's probably the same age as your oldest son. I'm pretty sure he's like 21 or 22 or something like that. Anyway, he's been great. He keeps me motivated. You just stay consistent at the gym. I love riding motorbikes.
Yeah.
A lot. And so I've got 2 motorbikes. I've got my VFR 800, which I rode up here, and I've got a little scooter. And I rebuilt a scooter engine just because I never done it before. And so I watched a lot of YouTube and basically dropped an engine out of a scooter, cracked the crankcase, and did a rebuild of it and put a 70cc kit in it, and it goes like stink. It's super fast. It's really dangerous. But it's fun, and it's how I get around, And I'm paying $6 to fill up my scooter, and everyone's paying stupid amounts of money for gas, and it's a lot of fun, and then at the same time, spending quality time with friends, where I am at the moment up here with my mate Rooney. We're just hanging out. We just hang out. Everyone gets together and we cook and we eat and we drink and we swim in the pool and all that sort of stuff. And it's so important, right? Because I think it makes you a better brewer if you spend time doing stuff that is not beer. Because if you don't look after yourself, I mean, we work in the liquor industry, and the temptation, it's very easy to go down the path of just drinking every day, drinking on the job, all that sort of stuff. I do not drink in the brewery but for sensory.
Sure.
I'm not in the brewery drinking at all. And I've seen brewers who do it. That's cool. But I don't drink in the brewery. I don't drink on school nights, so Monday to Thursday. Unless I do a podcast with my mate Dan on a Thursday night, I'll have 1 or 2 beers.
Yeah.
Tops, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that I want to be a brewer for a very, very long time. I want to do this until I die, And if I allow alcohol to become a problem either with my health, my mental health, an addiction or something like that, then I can't do the thing that I love.
Yeah.
Right. And that I hold very dear. And so it's really important that all professional brewers make sure that there's this separation between your professional life as an alcohol producer versus doing stuff that's outside of brewing, and pursuing hobbies or doing stuff or whatever it happens to be, outside of brewing, because that diversion, that break, you bring back into the brew house, it makes you a better brewer.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I think especially when you are, and it's not just when you're in a leadership position, it's really at any point. I feel like I was just talking, we just had a company retreat this past week. And one of the things that I discussed with the rest of the group was, when we walk in the door, we have to have something in our cup. Okay. So like if you're in a leadership position, part of one of the things that I see as my role as a leader is to help fill the cup of the people that I work with. Right.
Yes.
And if I'm walking in on empty, and that's going to happen some days just because life is life, but I have to treat myself outside of the brewery in such a way that I have something to give when I get to work.
Yes.
Right. And all those things that you mentioned are a very big part of that. I think we're seeing better conversations going on around this topic these days.
Yeah.
Whether it be mental health, physical health, the things that we consume, whether that be alcohol, whether that be recreational things, whether that be food. All of those things impact the way we feel when we get up in the morning. And I'm not here to tell you what you need to be doing with you, but on some
That's right.
level, hopefully you're treating yourself well enough that you can continue, as you mentioned, to do the thing that you love. And potentially, because this whole thing is ultimately bigger than beer, like you can love coaching people to help them make better beer, but there's a human aspect to that as well that's far more gratifying than the liquid in the pint, right?
Correct.
Because I don't think you can do what you do well without having the human element as well, right? I think that was one of the biggest leaps for me as a pro. There was a period of time where being a pro brewer was what defined me. It was my measure was what awards was I going to win, right? And that made me a very sad, very miserable man.
Yes.
And thankfully, and this is going to sound funny to say, I was fired from my first brewery job. And really big picture, what was happening. Well, and really big picture, the business wasn't doing what it thought it was going to do. And it was a financial thing. And I'll also say, I made my mistakes there. My ego was way too big and way too fragile. Right. And so it led me to shooting my mouth off to people I shouldn't be shooting my mouth off to. Right. Because I thought I was a big deal. Right. And I remember, big deal. I used to say to myself, well, there's no way they could fire me. Right. I mean, exactly right. That's that young man bullshit that I was thinking. Right. And that's no insult to our younger people out there. But that was part of my young man path. Right. And then one of my favorite things is I forget who said it. But somebody far smarter than me said that, the graveyard is full of unreplaceable people. Right. And it's good to come at it with some humility. And then I did have that shift later where it's like, dude, the thing I'm most excited about is I have somebody that's green, never worked in the industry. They didn't know what they wanted to do professionally. They're out of college, whatever. They came in here and they're loving this and they can make a career out of this. Helping develop people, dude, that's far better than anything I'm ever going to do with beer, right?
I love that. I love that with my coaching business and with the teaching that I do, and also the mentoring that I do down at the Brownstone Brewery down in Melbourne and that sort of thing. A lot of what you've sort of said is, for me, is about like not being attached to a specific outcome in life or a batch of beer or whatever it happens to be, is that, you can control the things you can control, but there's a hell of a lot of things that you can't, and you just have to accept that. And so, when I'm brewing, if I'm working with, let's say I'm doing some one-on-one work with a particular brewer and that sort of thing, I treat myself as myself as a guest in that brewer's brewery. And there are many things that I could call out, but I don't, and I just let it go. I'm just like, just nudge things in the right direction. You're going to pretty much get where you want to go, and that sort of thing. With my students, I really, really love my students and the hard work that they put into, changing career, because they all come to the technical college because they want to change career, and they reskill themselves and they apply themselves and they do really well at it, and then they go get jobs in the industry. And I'm super, super proud of all of their achievements. And the same goes with my coaching clients. Like, I have clients all over the world. I can't be in all of their breweries all at once. But I can certainly be there enough to give them enough guidance that I know that they'll go back to their brewery and they'll process the information and apply it in their own way in their brewery and get a really good outcome and make themselves really, really proud of their beer. That's very rewarding for me. And if they happen to win some silverware at a competition or something like that, awesome, absolutely brilliant, and I've seen lots of outcomes with that with my clients, that they go and they'll enter a competition for the first time and not do so well, and so we'll sit down or run through some of the judge feedback, and we'll find some issues that judge feedback is inherently difficult to interpret. I'm sure you've gotten plenty in your. I'm a judge, and I try so hard to write good judge notes, and I teach other judges. I'm on the committee for the Royal Queensland Beer Awards here, and one of the big things, remember, we've got 70 judges, and we're trying to get them to write good notes and you kind of have to get them to say, write what you would want to read if this was your beer, you know.
Yeah, right.
And so taking that judge feedback and then turning that into another batch of beer. So one of the things that I do with my clients, my Australian-based clients, is I get them to enter the Queensland Beer Awards, which is in sort of the end of February, start of March. They'll get their judge feedback from that, and then they can go and rebrew for the Australian International Beer Awards, which is in late April, early May, which incidentally you should enter because you can get shipment over through the BA.
Oh, really?
And yeah. They air freight stuff out to the Australian International Beer. It's the biggest beer competition in the Southern Hemisphere. We judged 2,800 beers last year.
Oh, dude, we're gonna have to check that out because they actually just gave that was one of the things that they put on my plate was making sure that we're getting things into different comps and whatnot.
Yeah,
and whatever.
Give us a shout, man. I'll connect you up, and they have a consolidation point somewhere in the US, and then they air freight the beer out to Melbourne. And it stays pretty fresh and cold, cold chip and that sort of thing. So, reach out to me afterwards, man. I'll point you in the right direction.
Definitely.
And vice versa. You know, I've got clients who are entering the World Beer Cup from Australia.
Yes.
This year because Garage Project has been awesome. They've got a consolidation point in Melbourne. So I've never entered it, and I've never had a client enter it before. So that's a really new experience for me. Different type of competition too, because World Beer Cup, you get a gold, silver, or bronze medal in the World Beer Cup. That's first, second, third. But the Australian International Beer Awards, it doesn't work like that. You get a score out of 20, and then depending upon your score is the color of medal that you get. So,
cool.
14 to 15 and a half is a bronze, 15 and a half to 17 out of 20 is a silver, and 17 and above is a gold medal.
Yep.
And the beauty of it is in a particular style class, you can have multiple gold medals or none, multiple silver medals or none.
I think it's a little bit more democratic way of judging beer quality or awarding beer quality, right?
Indeed.
Yeah,
it's by a standard, but rather than sort of like the best, second best, and third best.
Sure.
And so if you're making half decent beer, the chances are you're going to get a bronze medal, because bronze medal broadly means broadly adheres to the style, absent of major faults.
Yep.
That's it. And you got yourself a bronze medal.
Yep.
And you make a good beer. If you got yourself a bronze medal, that's a rock solid beer that I'd be more than happy to drink. And so judge notes can be a little bit problematic, and so I help my clients interpret them. Particularly if they have commonalities between a bunch of different beers that they've entered into one competition or part of a campaign, and they go back and they rethink their process, or they might rethink their recipe, and they'll go and rebrew it, and away you go. So
Sure. Well, hey, we just got. Let me see if I can. Look at what I just did.
Look at that! How did you do that?
I'm not sure, but I think I can. I hit show. And so // asks, how much do you contribute to a small brewery's success to marketing versus beer quality? So do you help on the marketing side, or is it pretty much just on beer quality?
Just beer quality. So I'm not even a brewery engineer. Lots of people approach me and they ask me to help them build a brewery or design a brewery. I've never built a brewery and don't plan to.
Sure.
But I see that being a professional brewer is like being a mechanic. There's mechanics who are specialized in engines, and there's ones that specialize in radiators and exhausts and brakes and all that sort of thing. They all get called mechanic, but they specialize in different things on a car. And there are brewery engineers who are very good at building and designing breweries and commissioning breweries and stuff like that. Some very, very talented people out there. That's not me. I'm a beer quality systems kind of guy. And that's what I do. So to answer the question though, how much do I contribute to small brewery success to marketing versus beer quality? I'd probably say marketing's quite a bit, probably more than 50%, I would say. I've seen some breweries out there making some pretty average beer, but with some slick marketing and do really well.
Man, it's interesting. And sometimes people, it's an interesting thing. Sometimes people will see a brand that is well marketed, do well, and then grow. And then they resent the fact that their small brewery is now big. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So just they resent the growth. But then there's also this other element where it's like, sometimes I feel like some people don't, I mean, they want the business to stay open, but they don't necessarily want it to become successful. Right. Or because sometimes people say, well, that place, they just have a killer marketing department. And it's like, they are a business. And
Yes, they've got to have a marketing department.
Marketing is an important part of business. So we're going to hold it against them, the fact that they have a good, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I think people have some weird takes when it comes to things like that.
Marketing you can have it's super important. You can have a brewery that makes really average beer, but has really good marketing. But if you flip it around the other way, that you've got a brewery that has terrible, poor, non-existent marketing, but really, really good beer, no one's going to drink those beers either because they just won't know about them.
Yep.
So,
and I think the same can be said on the service side of it, because there's multiple components to it. There's obviously the beer side, the marketing, and then taproom experience as well.
Yes.
We have longtime supporter Jamie Tripp in the chat. Look at us. Look at me just calling these things up.
This is great.
Did Hendo work with black hops back about 5 years ago? I listened to their podcast and actually bought the same kettles to build my brewery.
He's brought it to Anti-Brewery. Yeah. So Black Hops Brewery is a brewery that's down on the Gold Coast, not too far away from Brisbane, where I live, about an hour south. And so, no, I've never worked for Black Hops. I have consulted to Black Hops on a couple of occasions. The three founders, Dan, Eddie, and Govs, are all good mates of mine. And I do a weekly podcast called The Boss and the Brewer with Dan Norris, who's the former CEO of Black Hops. I've helped Black Hops put together their Australian International Beer Awards campaign. And when I say put together a campaign, it's having a look at all the beers and making sure they get categorized into the right class, even though they might be called something different.
That's a big, dude. I'm telling you, you're talking my language there. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely. It's an important part of entering competition. You got to play the game smart. Just because your beer says pale ale on the label doesn't mean it's a pale ale, because and there's like 10 different pale ale style classes.
Sure. Sure.
Put it in the right one. And your beer will perform better, if nothing else. And so I helped them put together their campaign. I think it was 2017 when they won the champion Australian small brewery at the Australian International Beer Awards. They continue to do well because they've got amazing beers and that sort of thing. I've never worked for them. They're good friends. I have worked with them. I've helped them put together, for example, their quality manual. They had a major recall a few years ago. They had a beer in a advent calendar. You get like a box of beer, you open one every day and that sort of thing. I'm sure you have them over there. You have Christmas, right?
Yep.
And so they had the December 25th beer, which was like a strong version of their eggnog stout that they make. And it's
there you go.
And it started re-fermenting in the advent calendar. And so they had to recall it. And I get a call from Dan Norris, the CEO, and he says, shit, we've got this beer that's re-fermenting. What do we do? And I said, dude, we wrote your recall plan. We actually did a mock recall.
Yeah.
Go. Do the recall thing. I'll support you, but you know what you got to do. And they covered that recall so well. For I think they only did 2,000 cans, so it was like only maybe 15 or 20 hectoliters of beer, so it wasn't too much beer. But that recall, cost $40,000.
Yes.
And they had to compensate all of the consumers $6 a can, and so that was very, very expensive. Plus all of the tax and the return freight and all sorts of stuff that went on top of that, and they did it, and they did that recall so well, and they were transparent with their communications. Really common, like when you go through a situation where you've got a food safety issue, like re-fermenting cans that can actually hurt people. the temptation is there to sweep it under the carpet and hope it goes away.
Yep.
But you can't do that, right? And so they were transparent. They communicated. They said we messed up. And do you know what it did? It was one of the best marketing exercises they ever did, because they handled that recall so well. They got a lot of good press out of it, and their sales doubled 6 months later.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that's that
so
classic. There's a book, I don't know if you've heard of it. This a guy, Danny Meyer. He's on the restaurant side of things. He's a big restaurateur, and he basically has the same story. He goes, listen, the mistakes are going to happen. It's how you deal with the mistakes. Those mistakes are an opportunity to create a customer experience that somebody hasn't had before. Right.
Yes.
And that is, that's a perfect example of it. And again, just be honest with what happened. Like, because people understand that mistakes happen, and then just make it right. That's a fantastic story.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
So no, I haven't worked for Black Hops. To answer the question, I haven't worked for Black Hops. I've worked for Black Hops as an external consultant sort of thing. The founders are good friends of mine. A lot of the staff are good friends of mine. But that's the extent of it. So no.
Excellent. Next question. We have some characters here in the chat. This one is from Spunding and Wirt, said in a German accent. Can you explain why or how a light beer gets a vinegar-like flavor after a few months in a tank? Like maybe it's done in a bright tank, and it starts picking up a vinegar-type flavor, light style beer.
That's an interesting one, because if you say vinegar, that kind of alludes to maybe having an Acidification microbial contamination. So Acidification is a bacteria that makes acetic acid, which is the acid in vinegar. But the thing is, right, is that even though Acidification is a spoilage bacteria in beer, it only works in the presence of oxygen. So at my brother's vinegar factory, he's got these reactors, which are these. It's like, imagine like 20 carb stones in the bottom of a tank full of wine, making lots of bubbles of oxygen. And the Acidification needs lots of oxygen to work. It's a really fickle bacteria. If it doesn't get the right temperature zone, which is like 31, 32 degrees and 8 parts per million of oxygen, it just dies. It's really fickle. It will grow, but very, very slowly. So if you've got a vinegar thing happening in your beer over a long period of conditioning time, as the old mate Spunding und Wirt says, then I would probably say that you might have a microbial contamination, and the first step would be to aseptically grab a sample of that beer and have it sent off to a lab for analysis for just the usual makeup of wild yeast, lactic acid bacteria, do an aerobic bacteria analysis of it, so that basically they can plate it up and put it in an oxygen-free environment and see if something will grow, or put it in a oxygen positive environment, see if other things grow, and see what's going on there. There's like that's as far as I'm prepared to speculate. I would be like, get a lab, get the information. It's not expensive to get a micro test done from a third party lab.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Advice. We've got Jay, who has a question about lower ABV beers, and we talked a little bit about lower ABV beers earlier, and sometimes those smaller beers can kind of maybe lack some robustness, right?
Yes.
And I mean, it's kind of part and parcel of being 3.5% maybe. But Jay asks, what would be your top 3 tips, or just some tips for maximizing flavor and presence from a low ABV beer?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So tip number 1 is do your mash at a temperature you think would not work. So I'm talking 72 degrees Celsius, and so that's really going to make your yeast have not much. There'll be a lot of unfermentable sugars in the wort, and therefore you'll get a higher finishing gravity. The beer will have a little bit more body and won't taste watery. Okay. That would be
Mhm.
tip number one. And believe me, when I say you can do a mash at 72 degrees Celsius, you can do it. I don't know what that is in freedom units off the top of my head, but
That's probably like
70,
get it. Yeah, it's like getting high like 160, like high 160s, maybe low 170s. Yeah.
it is 162.
Oh, 162. Okay, so it's just
Yeah.
on the other side of what people
Yep.
typically recommend, right? Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
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 So, and short, 20
I would
minutes
say
mash.
that's going to happen. That's going to happen in an
Yeah.
instant too at
Really, really
that time
fast.
for
Yeah. So
sure.
20-minute mash and you're done.
Yep. Yep.
And so that would be tip number one. Tip number two is imagine if you were making a full strength, so a 5% version of the same beer. You would have some base malt and then you would have some specialty malt. It might be some Vienna or some Munich or some crystal malt or something like that. And you're going to have those things to modify the flavor of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I was doing a low ABV beer, keeping the proportion, especially malt, goes up because I look at base malt as just becoming ethanol, right? Just becomes alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So if you write that recipe as if it's going to be a 5% beer and then just take out base malt until the starting gravity is going to be that 3.5% beer, the percentage of specialty malt is going to be much higher, but it's going to keep the flavor in the beer, right? So that would be that's kind of so base malt equals ethanol, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or equals alcohol would be the tip number two. Tip number three would be again pH would probably be a number that would impact the flavor. So if you're going to have a 3.5% say pale lager, its pH is going to, even if it's all malt, right,
Mm-hmm.
and no adjunct in it, its pH is going to be 3.8, 3.9, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where you want it, because you definitely don't want it to. You don't want to aim for that typical 4.2 pH that you would for a 5% version of that same beer, because it's going to taste flabby at that pH, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's probably the same amount of acidity in terms of grams per liter. So, yeah, very, very excruciatingly high mash temperature and short mash. Just take out base malt and leave the specialties in, and the proportion of specialty malt goes up, and also targeting a slightly lower pH as well. And then you're going to have good smashable low ABV beer. I love making them. They're really challenging because it's so hard to get a good amount of flavor from a very small package,
Definitely.
And if you can execute that well, then you're doing pretty good.
Absolutely. I love that answer, by the way. I think that's and I haven't framed it that way in my mind before with kind of the ratio between base malt and specialty malt. I really like that. Spunding and Vert is coming in once again with a great question, and this is I mean, it's part and parcel of his name. But do you spund any beers or bung any beers, and do you add top pressure at any time during fermentation? And do you feel as if it gives that air quote small bubbles, that finer foam? I think this is an interesting question because there are a lot of things with what we do which I feel like can be old wives' tales, okay, or just things passed down. This is just the better way. This is just the better way. Now, I know that I have started to do more bunging, spunding, whatever you want to call it. I feel as if just from an anecdotal standpoint, I feel that my foam stand is more robust when beers are handled like that, as opposed to pushing that gas into the beer later. So I've just been messing with that, and it's actually been a big topic for us between me and the chat for a while. So we'd love to get what your experience has been with it.
Yeah. So firstly, I just want to acknowledge that Spunding asked the question about Spunding, which I think is very meta. So thank you for the question, Spunding Unvert. Yes, you are going to get much finer carbonation and much better foam or head retention from spunding or bunging the tank. With the homebrew scene, there seems to be this real trend at the moment towards pressure fermentation, and I've done a lot of experimentation with different pressures and different yeast strains and different temperatures, and how the yeast strains and the flavor outcomes in the beer are affected by those variables. And I've not really had either a good outcome or a noticeably different outcome, right, in terms of organoleptically, right? Normally, so the general theory is that if you're going to pressure ferment something, that you raise the temperature as well. And most of the common yeast strains that you find in craft breweries, USO5, 3470, and their various variants that from different yeast laboratories, which are effectively the same yeast and that sort of thing, just don't behave that well under pressure, at least in the first half of fermentation, the first 50% of, say, gravity shift, because that's where all of the esters and yeast-derived compounds come from, that first 1/3 to 50% of gravity shift during fermentation. I've done experiments with pressure fermentation, fermenting at 10 or 12 psi and 17 degrees, and doing a 3470 lager ferment at 17 degrees normally, and winding up with phenolic, like white pepper notes in the beer that wasn't particularly pleasant. And that's kind of telling me that the yeast is not happy and is a little bit stressed, either from the temperature or the pressure or both. But the thing is with me, and when I use 3470 in lager, I run it to 15 degrees Celsius. It just goes 15 to 15.5 degrees. Just send it. It's clean. It's quick. It's really, really good. I
know more and more people that are running that strain warmer like that.
Yeah. It's fine. It's totally fine. You don't need to run it cold. And so I haven't seen anything that's given me an advantage to pressure fermentation. However, towards the end of fermentation, when you've got, say, 1 to 3 plateau of gravity shift to go, so that's going to be anywhere from 4 to 12 SG points of gravity shift to go to lock the tank up and spund the tank, or bunging and that sort of thing, and that will give you, and I'd usually combine that with a diacetyl rest as well when you're raising the temperature towards the end of fermentation. And so you're going to be carbonating that beer with its own CO2, and you're going to have that great carbonation and foam outcome, right? Because and then that's going to give you the best outcome. The other thing as well is that when it comes to carbonation, you've got to be mindful of Henry's law, right? And which is the gas law on how beer carbonation works, right? Which basically means the greater the pressure of a gas above a liquid is proportional to the amount of gas that's absorbed in the liquid, right? And they're proportional. Increase the pressure, it increases the amount of the gas that's dissolved into the liquid, right? Which is, you see a lot of breweries, they just put head pressure on and they wait 5 or 6 days, and that's how it kind of works. But what's not taken into account with carbonation in particular is the gas liquid interface, right? So if you're just putting head pressure on a tank just to carbonate it and it's taking a long time, it's because the gas liquid interface is like a disc, which is the top of the beer. Right? Whereas the reason why we use carbonation stones is we increase that surface area of the gas liquid interface by having billions of little microscopic bubbles from a carbonation stone. And provided you've got sufficient amount of, a high amount of head pressure, then the beer is not going to foam in the tank. So foam's a really interesting thing because it's proteins that mainly cause foam, and when foam happens, it generally only happens once.
Yeah, dude.
And so if you're making the foam happen in your tank, it's not going to happen in the glass. Right. So if you're carbonating beer with a carbonation stone and you're carbonating from almost no head pressure, then that's going to make lots of foam in the tank, and therefore that foam's going to have done its job, right? Whereas if you carbonate with a carbonation stone at pretty high pressure, so for me, usually around 150 kPa, what's that in PSI, something in freedom units, and you carbonate at that high pressure, A, it's faster, and B, you're not causing foam, and you preserve that carbonation, the proteins that make the foam, and you're going to have a good beer.
Yeah. So really, what's at play there? Because I'm looking at doing a little bit of deep dive content on bunging / spunding, and I've been looking for I would love to see some research papers on it. And so I've been digging around on the MBAA site, and I haven't turned up much yet. And so, and so we kind of got to it in our discussion right here. More than likely, the reason for the finer bubbles, the more robust foam stand, almost exclusively due to gentler handling of the beer.
Yes.
Is that? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And just there was a follow-up question there. What do I mean by good outcome?
Yes.
I mean a beer that looks good, smells good, tastes good, and feels good. That's a good outcome.
For sure.
That's what I mean.
For sure.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, man, we're getting tons of questions here. I'm gonna get one more from the chat here. This is my man Dale. Good day, Adam and Hendo. How would you deal with an overcarbonated beer in the bright? Now, just real quickly, I do want to say this. I did say good day, but one of my goals with this interview was not sounding like a jackass American. So I didn't get on the stream with a stupid Crocodile Dundee hat. All right. I have not tried to recreate any local slang or anything like that. I'm just trying to keep it on a level. So I do feel like I trespassed upon a little bit with the g'day, but it's right there. And so my hand was forced, but for what it's worth, what are your thoughts on this? What do you do with
how to deal with an overcarbonated beer in a bright beer tank? Okay, it's a really easy one, right? So Henry's law: if you've got the pressure of the gas above a liquid is proportional to the amount of gas that's dissolved in the liquid. Some people say partial pressure of the gas dissolved in the liquid being proportional. So basically, what you can do is you can lower the head pressure in the tank. Don't take it to zero, but take it to almost zero. And then what you can do is you can just burp the bottom of the tank literally for a second, not even. And if you watch the pressure gauge on the tank, you'll actually see the pressure gauge start to come up. And that's
thump it with some CO. You're injecting CO2 at the bottom of the tank, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So think about it this way, right? You've ever been to the pub, right? And they sell buckets of Corona, right? And you're standing there with your mates, and you're all standing there with a Corona. And then you've got that one dickhead mate that gets his Corona and bangs it on there, and it makes your beer foam up. That's what you're doing.
I will say that Australians have a 100% upper hand with the term dickhead. It sounds so much better when you guys say it. But anyways, okay. So continue. Yeah, you got your buddy.
That's effectively exactly. So you're effectively doing that, but just in the tank. But the thing is, though, is the thing to be mindful of is that whenever you do that, you are causing a small amount of damage to the beer. You're denaturing some of those foam proteins, so you're going to have head retention issues with the beer. So probably the most important thing is that if you're in one of those breweries that can measure carbonation, maybe you've got a ZARM or a CVOX or a Gold's meter or something like that, and you can actually measure carbonation. All breweries should at least be able to measure carbonation, right? If you can't measure DO, please at least be able to measure carbonation. That's not expensive at all to be able to do. And so I usually set when I'm writing a beer recipe, I'll set a target carbonation level. So, typical lager or pale ale is going to be about 5.2 grams per liter or 2.6, 2.7 volumes. And so setting a target, and then you need to set a tolerance, right? So because we're manufacturers, and when you're manufacturing, nothing is ever precise 100% of the time. You're not going to exactly hit 2.7 volumes every single time. It's going to be a little bit one side and a little bit to the other side. So you might set a tolerance in your brewery of plus or minus 0.1 volumes. Or if I'm doing grams per liter, my typical tolerance for carbonation is plus or minus 0.1 grams per liter. And if I'm in that zone, good enough. Send it.
Yes.
Right. But what you don't want to do is for anything that you measure that has a target and a tolerance, you don't want to get caught into the trap of, oh, I'm a little bit out. Oh, I need to correct it. Oh, I've overcorrected. Oh, and then you're overcorrecting over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you've just got to say to yourself, I'm close enough. Let's send this batch. Next time I brew this beer, I'll aim to tighten that up a little bit and
Definitely.
give yourself a little bit of leeway, and then you won't tear your hair out like me.
For sure. Well, listen, we've got 3 more questions because I don't want to hold you all day here, but we had a question come in from Jay Clancy, who was wondering, what is your opinion on not boiling wort for a softer mouthfeel in New England style IPA?
I probably wouldn't do that.
Tell me why.
No. So not boiling wort is going to have such profound impact on so many parts of the downstream process. You've got to ask yourself, why do we boil wort? We boil it because we want to pasteurize it and sanitize it, right? We want to create hot break and ultimately cold break as well, because we want to drop some of those proteins out. Now, admittedly, if you've got a hazy IPA, most of the haze is going to come from proteins. And so you probably wouldn't use something like Whirlfloc or something like that in a hazy IPA, a hot side, but you still got to boil it just to get some of those proteins denatured and out, because if too many of those carry over into the fermenter, then that's going to cause issues with yeast health down the track, right? Which you don't want to have either. And head retention and all that sort of stuff. Like all these things from not boiling is going to cause probably more problems than what it would be worth. So I don't. And then you got to ask yourself, like, what specifically are you trying to do by not boiling? Which particular aspect are you trying to achieve with how the beer looks, smells, tastes, or feels that is important to you as the brewer, right? So, and if you can answer that question, if you've got if within yourself, if you can come up with an honest, reason as to why you wouldn't be boiling and the specifics around what you're trying to achieve. I think they said softer mouthfeel or something like that. That wouldn't be a reason for me to not boil, because I see, although that may well be the case, I don't know, but it may be the case. Yes, you might get a softer mouthfeel, but the other risks that you introduce into that beer are so great that you got to ask yourself, is this mouthfeel thing really worth it for the other issues that I might potentially cause to the beer? And you've got to play that balancing act,
100%. 100%. Next question is going to come in from Ben Fenwick on Instagram. Hey, Hendo, with the difficult times in 2023, how does that affect the way breweries forecast? Also, how does the way breweries forecast differ from Australia to the United States?
I'm pretty sure we forecast the same way, just upside down. That's all. And so like forecasting is an art form that admittedly I'm not particularly good at, but it relies on speaking to your sales force in terms of what you believe you're going to sell, your logistics in what you've got in stock, and then what's happening in the brewery, which is what you can make in a certain time period. And so they're the kind of things that you really need to, what do they call it? Here we go. PPD, it's called. I had a client mention this to me the other day. Protection, production, and delivery. Right. So basically making sure that you've got the beer in stock, because you don't want to be overstocked and you don't want to stock out or run out of stock to sell. You've got beer, it takes a certain amount of time to produce, and then it takes a certain amount of time to get it to the customer. So there's a lot of moving parts there. That's pretty much the extent of my knowledge when it comes to forecasting. But from within the four walls of the brewery, what's really important is that the brewer knows what they're going to produce from both a strategic perspective and a tactical perspective, right? So strategic is like, what do I need out of the brewery packed this month, this 3 months, this year, right? And that gives you an indication of what sort of raw materials and that sort of thing you'll need to either forecast or contract or procure. And then you've got your tactical production planning, which is what's happening in the next 2 weeks. Some breweries do it in 3 weeks. And so that tactical production planning is, and breweries are really simple. It's like, what are we brewing? What's happening in the cellar? What's happening on the pack line? And what's happening in dispatch?
Sure.
Right. And so if you have your, let's say your 5 day a week, Monday to Friday brewery, you're going to have a 2 week calendar. It's going to have Monday to Friday this week and Monday to Friday next week. And you'd be able to figure out very quickly what's being brewed, what's happening in the cellar, what tanks need to be cleaned, what dry hopping, what transfers, all this sort of stuff, what's being packaged and how much is being packaged and how many kegs, how many cases, all that sort of stuff. And then what's being dispatched. Mm-hmm. And those 4 things, that's it. That's how brewery works. And if you know those things 2 weeks in advance and you communicate that perhaps on a whiteboard or something like that, then all your team, if you've got a team of brewers as you do, it's like they come into work, they know what's happening on a certain day, and therefore they know if they're in for a busy day or a quiet day, or if they can go home early, or they might be up for a bit of a late one or something like that. And it gives your crew certainty. Lifts the morale if people know what's happening. I've seen breweries that have had daily production planning meetings, and literally 3 times in a day, I've seen the head of production come out from the office onto the brewery floor and start changing the whiteboard at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and adding a whole bunch of tasks of stuff that needs to happen so they can brew work tomorrow.
Right.
And the crew just being absolutely demoralized because all of a sudden they thought they were at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're nearly done and they're getting ready to wrap up for the day, and all of a sudden another 4 or 5 hours worth of work appears out of nowhere. It feels bad, So you've got to have a little bit more foresight, at least 2 weeks for your tactical production planning.
Excellent. All right. Well, last question that we're going to take is going to come from Razor. Razor is a local guy. I think I'm going to see him at the Ohio Craft Brewers Conference coming up mid January. If you see me, please stop by and say hi. I will be stumbling around and wearing something Saunders, something Adam makes beer. So please say hey to me. But Razor would like to know, we've been brewing now for almost 2 years with the same brewery hoses. How often do you recommend changing out the hoses? We try to take really good care of them, but was wondering when and if they would need to be replaced. Thanks.
Yes. If you ever kink a hose, it's time to get rid of it. If you ever run over a hose with the forklift, it's time to get rid of it. All right? There's no second chances with that, because as soon as something like that happens, you've got a little tear inside the hose. Microorganisms can harbor inside those cracks, and it's game over for those hoses. Hoses and heat exchangers are the most common parts where microbial contamination will likely happen in a brewery. Mm-hmm. And you have to care for them. The little brewery I run down in Dandenong, we just replaced the hoses, and they'd actually been there for as long as I'd been there, so at least 10 years old. Okay. But that brewery does not make a lot of beer. So so that they were not overly used. So I guess the volume of product that goes through them would be a factor. And if you feel like you're unsure, then I would probably go to the extent of having, setting up a work line with the hoses and taking a sample and having it sent to the lab for some micro analysis. So basically what you would do is you would take a sample. It's really a process of deduction. If you take a sanitary sample straight after the heat exchanger, but before the oxygenation stone, straight after the oxygenation stone, because the oxygenation stone will harbor microorganisms, and then at the wort line as it goes into the fermenter, then you'll be able to identify where the micro is being picked up. Because if I get those 3 samples out of one turn, right, and I've only got micro in the last sample where it goes into the fermenter, then I know it's my hoses, right? But if I'm getting it, out of the heat exchanger, then I know that's the heat exchanger that's the issue. So it's just a process. Your lab is your eyes and ears of what's going on in the brewery. And you don't need to have a lab in a brewery, right? But having access to a good third-party lab, it's not expensive, and just being able to have some eyes and ears as to what's happening will make a world of difference and help you determine if you need to replace your hoses or not. So
definitely.
I'm sorry if that's a how long is a piece of string kind of answer, but it does depend. But there are tests that you can do to make sure that you can determine with conviction that the hose either needs to be replaced or not.
Definitely. And just one last quick note from the chat. Dale notices you've been going to the gym, man. He says you're looking fit, dude.
Yes. Thank you.
Looking lean and mean over there, dude. So good for you.
Yeah. No, it's been really good. I've kind of like this year's been an amazing year for me, and one of the best things that I've done is to start to take care of my health. The last 2 weeks have been pretty average because I've been on the road and not had access to a gym.
Yeah.
Plus, it's silly season with Christmas. There's been a lot of alcohol as well. I've not been the best in the last couple of weeks, but I'm going home tomorrow and I'm back with Cohen, my personal trainer, on Wednesday, and I'm back into it. It's really strange. Like it's like it was really tough to start going to the gym, and I've tried to join gyms before, but after about 6 weeks, and the habit just started to form. And if I didn't go, like let's say I was on the road and I had a few days and I didn't go, I'd actually go, gosh, I really need to go. But I actually really enjoy it.
Nice.
And just go lift heavy things if that's the thing that you want to do. If you want to go ride a bicycle, if that's how you choose to keep fit, or go for a run or something like that. But do something to look after your health if you work in the liquor industry, because it helps you to enjoy it more. And it's been great. I've lost a lot of weight this year. Like I started this year, I don't know what it is in pounds. I was 82 kilos, the heaviest I've ever been at the start of this year. And then I dropped down to 74, and I'm back because I've been getting them gains happening.
Yeah, right.
I'm back up to sort of 76-ish and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I feel great. I sleep better.
Hell yeah, dude.
My thoughts are clearer. I'm less stressed. And a lot of that I can attribute to exercise. The next thing that I'm going to start working on is good nutrition and stuff like that. One thing at a time, and just maintain the habit. It's really all you got to do.
Definitely.
But thank you for noticing.
Definitely.
Just tell the ladies.
Hey, well, Hendo, is there anything that you have coming up? I know we mentioned to hitting you up on your social media handles, Rockstar Brewer on Facebook, Instagram, X, stuff like that. Is there anything that you have coming up that you wanna have people keep an eye out for?
Yeah, look, I'm back on the road again next month. So just if you follow me on Instagram, I'm starting to post there a little bit more frequently, and I'll probably start doing some of the reels that I'm putting onto Instagram. Will probably go onto YouTube Shorts as well.
Yeah, double up on that content, man.
Yeah, it's good. Dude. Yeah, it's just it's how it works. And so if you want to see some of the stuff that I do day to day, either with my group coaching clients or what I'm doing with my one-on-one clients, or other stuff that I do, like next month I'm off to Toronto and Miami. I'm actually catching up with Kyle Smith from what's it called, Gorman Smith, I think it is. He's a teacher. The three of us should get together and have beers, because seriously, we are very, very closely aligned on brewing philosophy. So I'm going to Toronto in the middle of winter. I think it's going to be like a typical -7 degrees. But I'm going there, and then I'm going down to Miami for the Beer 30 Summit, which is in late January. So you'll be able to follow along on Instagram as to all of the stuff that I do through stories or reels and that sort of thing. And like next year's for travel is already huge. So yeah, Toronto, Miami next month. I'll still be going to Bali and Alice Springs every other month, so you can see Australia and Indonesia. April, I've been invited to judge at the Korean International Beer Awards in Seoul, Korea.
Wow.
Then I've also been invited back to Johannesburg to speak at the South African Brewers Conference. In fact, it's going to be in Johannesburg again this year.
Okay.
I might spend some time in Cape Town. There's a really good beer scene down in Cape Town, so I might fly down there. And then in August, I'm thinking about going to CDC actually.
Okay.
In April. So if you go to that and I go to that, then let's go to that and let's get a
Definitely.
beer. Which will be good in Vegas. I'm just going to go as a punter just because I've never seen it before, and I've just heard the sheer scale of it is huge. And then in August, I'll be in Fiji because I have a coach of my own. And so they have an annual get-together on a nice island. So I'm going to Fiji in August. And then in October, I'm probably going to spend most of October in Japan. So I should be judging at the International Beer Cup, which is in Hokkaido, Japan. And then I've got a good friend of mine, Adam Shell, who's getting married. He married a Japanese girl here, but they're going to have the Japanese wear a kimono version of the wedding in October. So I'll be there for that. And then back into Brisbane for the Australian National Homebrew Conference, plus judging Adelaide, Australian International Beer Awards, all that sort of stuff. So it's already a packed year. So
sounds like
and the thing is, I still get to do this. I still get to teach on Mondays, and I still maintain my coaching group and all that sort of stuff because it's like a little bit of digital nomad stuff. I can do that sort of thing from anywhere in the world. And so if you want to know a little bit more about what I do, head to rockstarbrewer.com, follow us on Rockstar Brewer. There's a Rockstar Brewer YouTube channel. I just love sharing knowledge. It's just good fun,
Definitely.
Like you do.
Definitely. Hey, and if you can hold on for a minute after we sign off, I'd just like to chat with you real quick. But once again, Hendo, this was fantastic, man. I absolutely loved the conversation. I think it was a blast. We've got some great feedback out of the chat. This was really a great time. Thank you so much for coming on. And jump in and check out. I'm gonna have some new Sonder brewery content coming up, so keep an eye on the YouTube channel for that. Do hit up the merch store if you want some Adam Makes Beer swag. I would tell you this right now, it's t-shirts and hoodies. I would buy a size up because I pre-ordered some stuff. Buy a size up if you jump in there. You can also get the Brew Daddy mug in there if there's something wrong inside of your brain and you think that's a good idea. You can do that too. But in the meantime, I hope everybody has a wonderful Christmas. Thank you to our sponsor, the wonderful folks over at Blickman Engineering. And Hendo, once again, man, thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right, brother. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.